a special treat for everyone today. We are standing here on the Michael Trostle farm, and I did just speak with the owner, Sam. So even though this is private property, he did allow me to come out here and do some pictures and video. This was the field hospital for the 1st, 2nd, 5th, and 6th Corps, mainly the 6th Corps, just following the Battle of Gettysburg. And the amazing thing about this barn is this barn was built in the spring of 1863, finished in May of 1863. So Michael Trostle, who had just finished this barn and began farming with it. And then all of a sudden, 2 months later, this huge battle comes into town. Thousands and thousands and thousands of wounded soldiers laying on the fields around throughout the battlefield in the town of Gettysburg, and then they were being brought to different farmhouses on the outskirts of town, including this one. So this man who builds this barn doesn't even get a chance to farm it, and all of a sudden it's being used as a field hospital, and about 500 soldiers are being brought in here. Of course, this barn, there were amputations going on in this barn, men dying. The barn was built in 1863 in the spring, like I said. And Sam, the owner of the barn, has documentation that some of the areas where on the front you can see the original wood siding, the metal siding was put on in the 1960s by his father. But the areas where you see wood missing in the front of the barn, and then there was even more under this metal siding, he has documentation from the historic district that states that they took the wood siding off to make caskets for soldiers that died in this barn, and then they were taken over to a walnut grove that sat over here in the valley, and they were buried. This barn is still used today by Sam. He farms the land and he has cattle here, and this barn is used today. He's not sure about blood stains or anything like that, and there is a couple marks. I see a little carving in there that says RJD 1933. So there's some markings on this barn, but again, the wood was all cut in 1863 in the spring and used to build this brand new barn. And it looks like we got an unhappy camper here. So, but you know, I told him I wouldn't go in the barn, but I'm gonna take some pictures here inside the barn for you. Now, one other thing that was mentioned to me about this was that the house that sits over here looks a little deceptive because it doesn't look as old as it actually is. The left side of the house today that has the vinyl siding on it, under that vinyl siding is a log house, and that part of the house was built in 1790. Now the right side of the house that has the fieldstone foundation, that was actually built in 1830. So this is actually one of the older houses around town, built in 1790, and then the addition added in 1830. So this is a Civil War house as well. So here Michael Trostle rather, had his home that was done and complete by 1830, and then he had just began to farm the land and build the barn over there in the spring of 1863 when this horrible Battle of Gettysburg came here and took over his barn and used it as a field hospital. This little hill that sits behind the barn here is also an interesting secret about the Gettysburg Field Hospital here on the Michael Trostle farm, because the hillside here in front of us was actually the site when the barn became overcrowded. They moved and set up tents over here on this hill where these walnut trees are, and they put a tent hospital outside. So there was actually a working field hospital, and one of the surgeons here was a female. Sam wasn't sure of the name, but she was a nurse here at this barn, and then later went out west and dug up dinosaur remains out on the west coast of the United States. So again, in summary, this is the field hospital for the 1st, 2nd, 5th, and mainly 6th Corps following the Battle of Gettysburg on the Michael Trostle farm and barn here near White Run, White Church Road, not too far from White Run, which was built in the year of 1863 in the spring and instantly used as a field hospital. This has been the Michael Trostle Farm on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. Okay, this is part 2 of the Michael Trostle farmstead, which was used as the 6th Corps Hospital. This hospital was established, like I said, on July 2nd near the Trostle House, which is over here and about 200 yards behind this medical department field hospital monument. The medical director was Surgeon Charles O'Leary. It also had volunteer Surgeon E.F. Taylor of the 1st New Jersey, Surgeon S.J. Allen of the 4th Vermont, and Surgeon Holman of the 7th Massachusetts. The medical officer in charge of all the hospitals was C.N. Chamberlain of the United States Volunteers. The hill that sits here to the right of the monument was actually the same hill that I showed you from a different angle, where when the original 315 soldiers who were inside of this hospital swelled to about 500, they moved those soldiers up hillside over here where there was a grove of walnut trees and put them in tents outside. This was a really good position for this hospital as well, because it sat just behind, just over the house and the barn are over here, and then you have the hill, and just beyond the hill to the back is Rock Creek. So they had a really good supply of fresh water to use for drinking, for operations. This was probably one of the nicer field hospitals if you were a wounded soldier that you could be taken to. So here is the banks here of Rock Creek behind the Michael Trostle house. And you can imagine here in July of 1863, if you were a surgeon or a nurse, a volunteer, and your field hospital is the barn, which you can see the roof right here of the barn, and then of course the large Walnut Grove Oak Hill. You can imagine surgeons, nurses, and volunteers coming back here constantly to the creek, washing dirty rags that are filled with blood, also gathering water for operations, for drinking water, which of course would have to be boiled. But this hospital was on a really good site because it sat here right on the banks of the Rock Creek. This has been the Michael Trostle Farm, the 6th Corps Field Hospital on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook. This is the Michael Trostle Farm, Part 3, and we're going to talk about one other thing, a witness tree. This was a witness, of course, to the hospital that stood here at the Michael Trostle Farm, and it's a sycamore tree, and it's right here in front of us. And I know it looks tiny, but what I was told by this tree was that this tree lived to about 180 years old. Or I shouldn't say lived, because it's still alive in some sense. But if you look at this tree, the overwhelming majority of this tree died, and it had a really huge circumference, as you can see here as we walk around it. And about 30 years ago, the tree actually died, rotted away, and was cut down. But somehow, a sprout of the original tree, which is still connected to the original rotted stump, is growing out of the ground. So technically, even though this sprout may have not been here, the tree, or the rooting system of this tree, was here and was a part of this field hospital that sat here at the Michael Trostle Farm in July of 1863. And it's right here at the bank of the Rock Creek. So, of course, a lot of the trees that are in this area got a good, fresh water supply from the banks of this creek here. This has been the Michael Trostle Farm Part 3 on Gettysburg Battlefield Facebook.